My name is Nicola Bernard. I'm 32 years old. I live in a small house on the outskirts of Tours and I work as a field technician for a mid-sized local company. Nothing extraordinary, but a decent life. I've paid off half of my mortgage. I drive an old van that's 10 years old and I don't complain much. I'm neither rich nor poor, just content. I've had relationships, of course, but none lasted. Maybe I'm not the easiest person to open up to, or maybe I just haven't met the right one yet. Either way, I'm not in a hurry. I've learned to appreciate what I have. Quiet weekends, fixing things around the house, listening to the same old records. That kind of life. Anyway, this story began on a Friday. A perfectly ordinary work day. I arrived at the office as usual, 15 minutes early, because I hate rushing. I grabbed a coffee from the lousy machine in the corner and sat in my usual spot at the back table, near the window. We were waiting for our weekly meeting with Audrey, our boss, Audrey Lambert. She's the general manager of the company and runs it like clockwork, but not in a negative way. She's smart, elegant, and chooses her words carefully. Most of the time, when she walks into the room, everyone straightens up a little. She came in at exactly 9 o'clock, dressed in a light grey pantsuit with high heels, her hair tied back. "Good morning," she said, placing her phone face down on the table. "Good morning," we murmured back. She went through the usual weekly recap, deadlines, schedules, upcoming installations, customer complaints, the boring but necessary stuff. I listened attentively, took a few notes as usual, and then, out of nowhere before wrapping up, she asked if anyone was free that evening. She needed help at home, just 3 shelves to put up and a television to move to another wall. I saw people squirming in their chairs, that awkward silence where no one volunteers, but no one wants to look lazy either. I looked around. No one said a word. So I raised my hand. "I can help," I said, "as long as it doesn't end too late." She looked at me a second longer than usual, then nodded. "Perfect. After 6, does that work for you?" "Of course," I replied. The meeting ended a few minutes later. Everyone left. No one said anything about it, not even the usual jokes from colleagues. Maybe because it was Audrey. She usually didn't let anyone into her personal space. The rest of the day was normal, a few calls out in the field, a few updates in the system. I had lunch at my desk, leftover pasta, and watched half a documentary on my phone. Around 5:30 p.m, I clocked out, put my small toolbox in the van, and left. Her address was only 10 minutes from the office. The neighborhood was upper middle class, but not ostentatious. Quiet, clean. I parked in her driveway at 6 sharp. I remember staying in the van a second longer than necessary. I don't know why. I wasn't really nervous, just curious. You don't expect the boss to ask for help like that. I grabbed my toolbox, walked to the door, and knocked. A few seconds later, she opened it, and she looked different. Gone was the suit, the high heels, the strict bun. She was wearing soft grey sweatpants and a loose sweater, no makeup. Her blonde hair fell over her shoulder. She looked real. "Hey," she said, "thanks for coming." "No problem," I replied. Her house was neat, minimalist, a few books on the shelves, a well-used coffee machine, a large television still on its stand. "The shelves go in the living room," she said. "I've already marked where I want them." I got to work. She sat nearby and watched a cooking show at low volume. We didn't talk much, just the occasional question about height, placement, wall brackets. She offered me a drink. I asked for water. She laughed. "Most people ask for something else," she said. I answered that I still had to drive. She smiled. I finished the shelves and moved on to the TV mount. It took about an hour and a half. As I was putting my tools away, she walked into the room with a white envelope in her hand. "Here," she said, holding it out to me. I looked at the envelope, then at her, and said, "I'll do it for free." "Are you sure?" she asked, almost surprised. I nodded. "Yes, really?" She paused, then without changing her tone, asked, "So what are you doing this weekend?" I blinked. "What this weekend?" she repeated. "Do you have plans?" Not really. Just resting. Maybe a few small jobs around the house." She tilted her head slightly, as if thinking about something. Then she said, "Would you like to hang out a bit, just like that? Nothing strange. I often get bored on weekends." I stood there, toolbox in hand, trying to figure her out. There was no flirtation in her voice, just honesty. A woman asking a man if he wanted company, nothing more. I said, "Yes, of course, why not?" She smiled. "Cool? Saturday late morning?" I nodded. "That works for me." And just like that, I left. I climbed into my van, drove home, and sat on my couch for 10 minutes, wondering what had just happened. Saturday morning arrived with a cloudy sky and that silence you only find in small towns. I woke up earlier than expected, maybe out of habit, maybe because I was thinking about her invitation. I questioned everything. Maybe it was just kindness. Maybe she felt bad because I hadn't taken the money. Maybe she was simply lonely, or maybe it was something else. At 10:15, I was showered, shaved, wearing a clean flannel shirt and jeans, and I was in my van, engine running. I parked in her driveway at exactly 10:30. She opened the door barefoot, dressed in black leggings and a loose, dark blue sweatshirt. Her long blonde hair was tied back, messy but still beautiful. She looked so different from the boss I'd known for 4 years. "Right on time, down to the minute," she said with a smile. "Come in, I just made coffee." The smell hit me as soon as I stepped inside. A dark roast, stronger than anything we had at the office. Her house was quiet. No music, no television, just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional chirping of birds outside. She handed me a cup and walked out onto the terrace. I followed. The garden was well kept, with a small barbecue, a few chairs, and a stack of wood beside a fire pit that looked like it hadn't been used in months. "I thought we could do something simple today," she said, sitting down. "How about skewers, corn, and a drink? Just a simple lunch in the garden, nothing fancy." I sat across from her. "Sounds perfect." There was a pause, not awkward, but a pause nonetheless, as if we were both adjusting to seeing each other outside the usual setting. "Do you do this often?" I asked. She looked at me. "Invite employees? No, this is the first time." "That's what I thought." She smiled into her coffee. "But you're different. You helped without trying to impress me. That's rare." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. She stood up, stretched her arms above her head and said, "All right, let's fire up the grill." We spent the next hour preparing. I chopped vegetables while she seasoned the skewers. It was simply peaceful. We didn't talk about work at all. She told me how she grew up in Tours, left for her studies, founded the company with her ex-husband, and bought it back after their divorce. "No children?" I asked at one point. She shook her head. The relationship was already falling apart by the time I thought about it. She didn't say it with bitterness, just as a fact. She turned the skewers and changed the subject herself. I shared a bit about my life. I grew up here in Tours. I live in the same house my father left me. I renovated it myself. I did odd jobs before landing this one. "I like men who can fix things," she said casually, handing me a drink. We sat outside with our food on paper plates. No pressure, no flirting, just two people eating under a cloudy sky. And honestly, I hadn't felt that relaxed in a long time. After lunch, she took a blanket and spread it out on the grass. We sat there with our drinks, watching the clouds. "Have you ever thought about leaving?" she asked. "Leaving where?" "Tours, the job, everything?" I shook my head. "Sometimes, but I don't know where I'd go. I've built a life here, even if it's not glamorous." She nodded slowly. "I understand." After that, there was a long silence. Then she said, "Would you like to stay for dinner? I've got wine and a stack of movies I never watch unless someone's here." I looked at her. I tried to read her again, but it wasn't romantic, not flirtatious, just sincere. "Of course," I said. Inside, she slipped on a soft grey sweater and warm socks. She handed me a blanket, and we sat on her couch watching an old 90s movie I hadn't seen since high school. At one point, her head gently rested on my shoulder. She didn't ask. I didn't move. We didn't talk much after that. We just watched. A shared warmth. Two people who hadn't expected to end up on a couch together, but who didn't want to be anywhere else. Around midnight, I stood up to leave. She walked me to the door. The outside air was colder than I had expected. "Thank you for today," she said. "You're welcome." She looked like she wanted to say something, but didn't. I climbed into my van and sat there, the door half closed, staring at the porch. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, leaning against the frame. I gave her a small wave and pulled out of the driveway. On the way home, I caught myself smiling like an idiot. I had no idea what this was going to become, but I knew it wasn't nothing. Sunday morning, I woke up late, 9:30. For me, that's late. The house was quiet. Light filtered through the blinds. The kind of morning that makes you forget alarm clocks exist. I stayed in bed for a few minutes, thinking about yesterday, about her, about Audrey. I hadn't expected it to feel so easy, so natural, with a woman who at work always seemed so composed, so sharp, so distant. She had let her guard down, not dramatically, just enough to remind me she was human, funny, familiar, in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I was making eggs when my phone rang. It was Audrey. "Hey, what if we did part 2 today? No expectations, just company." I looked at the message for a moment and smiled to myself. I replied, "I'll bring the coffee. 11 o'clock. Okay, Nicholas, perfect." At 10:50, I was back in her driveway in Tours, 2 cups of coffee and a paper bag in hand. She opened the door before I could even knock. This time, she was wearing a white t-shirt tucked into high-waisted jeans, barefoot again. Her hair was down, slightly damp, as if she had just showered. "Looks like you came straight from the coffee machine at the market square," she said playfully. We sat at her kitchen island. The coffee was still hot. She looked at me over the rim of her cup. I had almost forgotten what it was like to be with someone without needing to be something. I didn't say anything. I just nodded because I felt the same way. She suggested taking a walk outside the city, not far, just somewhere quiet. Calm. I offered to drive, but she said, "Yesterday you were the guest. Today I'll drive." Her car was a black SUV, clean, comfortable, silent. She put on soft music, mostly acoustic covers, pleasant background music. The windows were rolled down, the wind blowing through her hair. We didn't talk much during the ride, but it wasn't awkward. We ended up in a park outside Tours near Lake Rylot, a small lake with a narrow gravel path and a few benches under the trees. A few families were there, children feeding ducks, couples walking hand in hand, but mostly it was quiet. We walked slowly along the path. She told me how she used to come here when her marriage was falling apart. She didn't say it to gain pity, but as a chapter of her story. I felt like I was losing everything: the company, love, self-respect. I came here just to breathe. "You seem much stronger now," I said. She looked at me and smiled, but it was a sad smile. "I am. But you feel alone, Nicholas. Strength doesn't solve that." We sat on a bench by the water. She took off her shoes and crossed her legs. I leaned back, arms stretched across the bench, the sun breaking through the clouds, the air smelling of trees and lake water. "Do you regret never leaving?" she asked. "Leaving where?" "Tours, the job, everything." I thought for a moment. "Sometimes. But I've always tried to build something where I am instead of chasing something better. Maybe that's safer." She nodded slowly. "Or maybe it's braver." We didn't say anything for a while, just listened to the water, the laughter of a child in the distance, the breeze in the trees. Eventually we stood up and walked back to the car. On the way back, we stopped at a small roadside stand and bought homemade peach jam. I didn't really like peach jam, but she said it was a non-negotiable weekend treat, and I went along with it. Back at her place, we sat on the veranda. She opened a bottle of wine, just one glass each, not to get drunk, just for the taste. She prepared a light dinner, pesto pasta, toasted bread. I offered to help, but she shook her head. "You've done enough yesterday," she said. "Today, you sit and talk to me." And that's what I did. I told her how my father had taught me to fix things, how I had almost become a truck driver, how I lost my mother at 25 and stopped chasing big dreams after that. She listened, really listened. After dinner, we settled on the couch. She pulled out an old, dusty box of DVDs. "Pick one," she said. I held up Good Will Hunting. She smiled. "Perfect." Halfway through the movie, she fell asleep on my shoulder. I didn't move. I just sat there, letting her breathe calmly, her head resting against me, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a supporting character in someone else's story. I felt that maybe, just maybe, I had found something real. Sunday morning began slowly. I wasn't hungover. I hadn't even finished my half glass of wine, but I woke up feeling full. Not from food, not from sleep, but from that rare kind of fullness that comes when life gives you something you didn't know you needed. It was nearly 10 when I looked at my phone. No message. I hadn't expected one either. I thought maybe yesterday had been a one-time thing. Maybe she had just needed company. Maybe today everything would go back to normal. But at 10:01, a message arrived. "Audrey. Hey, how about round 2 today? The fire pit is clean. You round?" I looked at the message and smiled despite myself. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. I pulled on jeans and a flannel shirt. I put on a jacket and grabbed a small bag of marshmallows from the pantry. I don't know why, it just felt like the right thing to do. When I pulled into her driveway in Tours, she was already outside, gathering a few leaves in the garden, her hair in a messy bun, an old hoodie half unzipped. No makeup, just her. "Hey," I said as I walked up. "Good morning," she replied, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Perfect timing. I was just pretending I knew how to garden." She motioned for me to come closer. The fire pit was clean, the logs stacked neatly, the chairs arranged around it. 2 cups sat on the small garden table. Steam rose from one of them. "Strong coffee," she said. "Do you like it?" We sat in silence for a while, sipping. The sun was low but warm, the kind of morning where nothing feels urgent. She leaned back in her chair. I'd forgotten how nice this is, just being quiet. "You don't get that often?" I asked. She shook her head. "I thought I did, but silence at home when you're alone is different from silence when someone's there. This," she gestured toward the garden, "this is good silence." I didn't say anything. I understood. Around noon, we went to the town's farmer's market. She wore sunglasses and a beige coat. For a moment, I felt like we were just 2 people on a Sunday. No boss, no roles, just whatever was happening. We wandered through the stalls, apples, honey, candles, fresh bread. She picked up a loaf of sourdough and a jar of tomato jam. "Ever tried this?" she asked, holding up the jar. I shook my head. "It's disgusting," she said with a smile, "but somehow addictive. Well, you're the expert." Well, we walked slowly through the rest of the market. A few people recognized her, nodded politely, nothing more. She stayed close to me, not touching, but close enough that it felt intentional. At one point, an older woman selling cakes leaned over her stand and said, "You make a lovely couple." Audrey smiled politely. I coughed, embarrassed, but neither of us corrected her. Back at her place, we made sandwiches with what we'd bought and sat at the kitchen island with 2 cold lemonades and an open bag of chips between us. After lunch, she disappeared for a few minutes and returned with a folded blanket and a battered box of board games. "Game or nap?" she asked. We ended up on the living room floor, legs crossed, playing a trivia game from the early 2000s. Most of the questions were outdated and half the pieces were missing, but it didn't matter. We played for over an hour, chatting between questions, laughing when we both gave absurdly wrong answers. At one point, I caught myself watching her. Not romantically, just watching. The way she wrinkled her nose when she couldn't remember a movie title, the way her fingers fiddled with the edge of a card when it was my turn. When the game was over, we lay on the rug. The late afternoon light filtered through the windows. She turned her head toward me. This is the moment where it gets complicated. "No," I said, looking at her. "Not necessarily." She smiled, her eyes soft. "No, I suppose not." After a moment, she sat up and stretched. "Come on, one more thing." We went back into the garden. She lit the fire pit with a long lighter and tossed in a few logs. The flames caught quickly. I pulled the marshmallows out of my jacket pocket. She laughed. "You came prepared. I knew you were the type to like marshmallows." "I am," she said, taking one and sliding it onto a skewer. We stayed there until sunset, roasting marshmallows, sipping hot apple cider she had warmed in a pan on the stove. At one point, the sky turned pink, then violet, then dark. She stood, wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, and looked at me. "Do you want to stay for dinner again?" I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't want to assume anything. She noticed the hesitation and added, "I mean, I feel like you should stay." So I stayed. We made pasta again, this time with garlic and olive oil. Nothing elaborate. She put on jazz music in the background, and we ate slowly, talking about music, old films, and strange childhood stories. Once the dishes were done, we settled on the couch again. This time, she leaned against me without hesitation. Her head rested on my chest, her legs folded. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. At one point, she murmured, "I can't remember the last time I had a weekend like this." I didn't know what to say. So I pulled the blanket over her shoulders and said, "Me neither." And that was enough. We sat like that for a long time. No television, no phones, just the ticking of her wall clock and the occasional creak of the old wooden floor. When she finally stood to walk me out, it was nearly midnight again. She accompanied me to the door as she had the night before. This time, she didn't say thank you. She just looked at me and said softly, "Let's not pretend this didn't happen." I nodded. "All right." And I meant it. Monday came quickly. Too quickly after such a weekend. Reality hits differently. I woke up early, shaved, put on a shirt I wouldn't normally wear, not because I had to, but because I wanted to look neat and professional, as if nothing had changed, but everything had changed. I arrived in the parking lot a few minutes before 9. The building looked the same as always, but it felt different, like the lights were a little colder, like I was walking into something I couldn't afford to mess up. Inside, the day began like any other. Phones rang, printers hummed, the old coffee machine gurgled, giving everything a cardboard taste. I sat at my desk and pretended to check emails, but in reality, I was waiting. At 8:01, I heard her heels. Audrey walked in through the glass doors, coffee in hand, hair tied back, face flawless, eyes straight ahead. She looked exactly as she always did, the woman in charge. The weekend version of her had vanished, hidden somewhere behind the professional mask she wore so well. Our eyes met for half a second. She gave the slightest nod, barely perceptible. That was all. No smile, no pause, no acknowledgement beyond what she gave any employee on any Monday morning since I'd known her. I understood. We had silently agreed to keep this private, and I was fine with that, or at least I thought I was. The day dragged on. I buried myself in maintenance and installation tasks. I didn't see her again until after lunch, when she passed through the technicians area to check on a new client installation. She spoke to a few people, never looked at me. At 1, I clocked out and went to my van. I sat there, engine off, staring at the steering wheel. I wasn't angry, not even sad, just uncertain. Were we something? Or were we just two lonely people who had shared a weekend and nothing more? That night, we didn't write to each other, nor on Tuesday, nor on Wednesday. By Thursday, I started to wonder if I had misunderstood something. Maybe I wanted to see something that wasn't there. Maybe it had just been two quiet people finding a bit of comfort for a few days. Temporary, surely limited. But Friday morning, everything changed again. I was replacing a client router at the office when a Slack message popped up on my screen. Audrey, are you free for lunch? I stared at the message, typed yes, deleted it, waited, typed it again, and sent it. She replied immediately, conference room, B15 at 12:13. I walked into the room. It was empty. I sat down, palms damp, trying not to expect anything. She arrived 2 minutes later, closing the door behind her. No laptop, no coffee, no papers, just her. She sat across from me and exhaled, a long breath, the kind you only take when you've been holding something in for too long. I've spent the whole week thinking about it, she said, searching for the right words. I stayed silent, letting her speak. I liked being with you last week, she continued, more than I expected. And when Monday came, I didn't know how to act. I've never done anything like this with someone from work. It scared me. It still scares me. She lowered her eyes for a moment, then lifted them back to mine. But I don't want to pretend it didn't happen. I don't want to pretend it didn't mean anything. I nodded slowly. Me neither. She paused, searching for something in my face. I don't have big plans, she said. I don't know what this will look like, but I'd like to see you again. Here, not during work hours, just outside of all this. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. I just said, all right. And we left it at that. That weekend, we met for dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant 2 towns over, where no one knew her and no one cared who I was. We talked. We laughed. She leaned across the table to wipe a drop of sauce from my chin. And for the first time since I'd known her, she looked light, not serious, not reserved, just Audrey. We began seeing each other regularly, slowly, cautiously, keeping it secret. Not because we were hiding, but because it was ours. Something we didn't have to show the world. Months passed, the weather grew warmer, her hair grew a little longer. She showed up at my place with groceries. I left a toothbrush at hers. At work, nothing changed. She remained the boss. I remained the technician. People sometimes gossiped, small-town offices always do, but we kept things clean, professional. We never gave them anything concrete to hold on to. And then one evening, maybe 6 months later, I was at her place, fixing the leg of her coffee table. She was in the kitchen barefoot, pouring wine into 2 glasses. I hate this thing, she said, pointing at the table. I could build you a new one, I offered. She looked at me, tilted her head, and said, No, I want you to move in with me. I didn't answer right away. I just kept adjusting the wrench. But when I finished, I stood up, walked over to her, took the glass of wine from her hand and said, All right. And that was it. The following month, we moved in together. No wedding, no big announcement. Just a quiet decision between 2 adults who had found something rare and decided to hold on to it. No drama, no games. Just a woman who asked for help one Friday afternoon.